Welcome to Modern Farm Business Podcast. This podcast is designed to help the farm leader bring their business to the next level. We'll cover everything from leadership and finance to strategy and planning. I'm your host, Dean Hefta. If we're involved in any organization, be it our own growing farm or a community board, we likely have experienced the tug-of-war when people struggle against each other or with themselves to get what they want, causing relationships or even entire systems to unravel. Today, we're going to dig into how we can better deal with the conflict that is bound to occur and how we can provide some leadership in real time in those situations. To help me with this, I'm joined by Nate Regier. He's CEO and co-founder of Next Element, a global leadership firm specializing in communication and conflict skills. He's an expert in social emotional intelligence, group dynamics, executive assessments, and coaching. Nate is a co-developer of Next Element's Leading Out of Drama training and coaching system and a process communication model certifying master trainer. He's co-author of Beyond Drama, Transcending Energy Vampires, and author of the acclaimed book Conflict Without Casualties, a field guide for leading with compassionate accountability. Welcome to the show, Nate.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So we're talking about conflict today. And if you talk with 10 people, you're going to get 10 different reactions when it comes to a topic like conflict. Some think it's a really good thing and it's important. Others really want to avoid it at all cost. How do you define conflict?
Well, we experience the same thing. So many people have different reactions. We have tried to distill down conflict to something that is separate from maybe experiences that we've had and more focuses on what is the core essence. So our definition of conflict is it's essentially the gap between what I want and what I'm experiencing at any point in time. And that gap is pure energy. It's neither good nor bad. Where people develop negative associations with conflict has to do with how we spend that energy, positively or negatively. But the gap itself is just energy.
That's a great construct. I see that in my mind where you have on one hand, these are the things that I want. And on the other hand, this is what I'm experiencing right now. And to see the difference between those two as where conflict lives is a great image for me. What are some of the things that we run into that lead us to want to avoid that thing that we call conflict? Well, like what gets us in trouble in handling it the wrong way?
That's a good question. And I think some of the answer comes from our kind of essential human nature, and some of it comes to our past experiences. Conflict is emotional. We can't get around it. And most of us experience that energy of conflict manifests physiologically. Maybe our heart pounds, maybe the hair stands up at the back of our necks. We get, the blood pressure goes up, and we have emotional responses to that. Not a lot of people want to embrace and experience that emotion, because it's just uncomfortable. And so that's one reason why things get squirrely. But another reason is maybe we have seen that energy being misappropriated and misused in this typical human thing, which is self-justification. So often when we don't know what to do with that energy, we want to somehow make it somebody's fault or export it or assign responsibility for it rather than just seeing it for what it is. So negative experiences and the need to feel justified, as well as this emotional thing, I think makes it a very difficult energy to handle.
Are there some maybe some myths or traps that we run into that maybe set us up to deal with that energy, that emotion in maybe an unhealthy way?
Yeah, there are. And myth is a good name for it, because the definition of myth is something that is not true what we believe it. And in a lot of ways, myths are like survival things. We need to believe these myths to keep moving forward. And one of the myths of conflict is that people always get hurt, that conflict creates casualties. And that may have been what I've experienced once in a while, or maybe I see that on the news, but that doesn't mean that that's the way it is. Another myth might be that conflict is dangerous, and so it should be controlled, mediated, managed. And, if you Google the word conflict, it's fascinating how Google will kind of populate phrases. It will add words and phrases that tend to co-occur. And some of the most common words you'll see along with conflict are mediation, management, and reduction. And what does that say about how we see conflict? So those are two of the biggest myths.
Yeah, so we can get maybe drawn into this societal definition of conflict as being a bad thing, and that kind of keeps perpetuating our myth. Could you give us an example of maybe something you've experienced or witnessed where, boy, if it weren't for conflict, things wouldn't have turned out as well as they did, that conflict became the path to that positive end?
Yeah, I'll give you an example that happened less than an hour ago in our staff meeting. We're going through a process of rethinking how we can best achieve our mission in the world with compassion and accountability. And we're trying a concept called zero budgeting, where you start with nothing and start to build instead of starting with line items, which is incremental budgeting, and saying, do we need to decrease? Do we need to increase? And we got to a point where we realized there was a tremendous gap between what we wanted, which was to give our trainers all over the world autonomy at the same time as they have fidelity. And at the same time, what we're experiencing is a lot of dependence and power struggles. And so we started asking questions about how are we going to deal with this energy? And we started throwing out some stuff that seemed really counterintuitive. And pretty soon, we were getting ultra creative because we simply acknowledged the gap and started spending that energy on these crazy ideas about how we could achieve both at the same time. And we actually came up with something an hour ago that I think we're going to look back on in about 5 years and say it was a significant turning point for us.
What's helpful for me with that example is it was simply the experience that the group had that we have a gap. Yeah. And it wasn't, we got into a yelling match or there was name calling going on, which so quickly people can associate with conflict. But really that conflict doesn't mean, or maybe to your point, it shouldn't mean that there is high emotion. Is that right?
Well, there can be passion. Absolutely, there can be strong emotions, but emotions are just emotions. And what humans often do is we will try to export our emotions or import other people's emotions. But for some reason, humans just do not want to be responsible for their feelings. And so we try to say weird things like, you made me do it, or, okay, that was a dumb idea. I should never say anything again. Or why doesn't anybody ever listen to me? And all of those statements are drama because what they're trying to do is turn that energy of conflict into somebody's right and somebody's wrong, somebody's okay and somebody isn't. And as soon as we cross that line, we no longer are stewarding that energy in any kind of productive way.
Very helpful. Nate, your recent book uses what you call compassionate accountability to address conflict. So say I'm building a farm and dealing with suppliers and employees and even family members on a daily basis. What do I need to do to put this approach to work in dealing with conflict?
Yeah, that's a great challenge, and it applies in any aspect of our lives, like the ones that you mentioned. I think the first thing is to recognize and accept two truths that seem really opposite. One of them is that compassion without accountability gets you nowhere, and you can't just nice your way into these tough kinds of difficult relationships. The opposite is also true, which is accountability without compassion gets you alienated. We all know what happens when we use a heavy-handed command and control approach every time we want something. We just push people away. So refusing to accept that those two cannot coexist and forcing those two to coexist is one thing that is a profound paradigm shift. And then the next thing is to accept that human beings are worthwhile, they are capable, and they're accountable. And that in every interaction, we will hold those three things to be equally true and equally important in all interactions.
Yeah, and as simple as what you just said is, it can be very difficult, can't it?
It can be extremely difficult. And the conversation we were having earlier about how personality influences this, we see this playing in all the time. We talk about these three core competencies for compassionate accountability, which is openness, resourcefulness, and persistence. All three are necessary but not sufficient by themselves. to be able to do healthy conflict. But our personalities very often will predispose us to one or two of those as preferential. I'm very predisposed to resourcefulness and persistence. I love to get things done. I love creative thinking. I love analytical work, and I'm a go-getter. But when it comes to openness and my ability to create a safe place where people can be vulnerable and share their emotions and their motives, I don't do well at that. I'm not naturally gifted that way, so I tend to not value it. I tend to not be able to do it well. And so I don't support that third of the formula. And yet all three are just as important in order to do healthy conflict. So I think a lot of people have had bad situations with conflict because they may be able to do one or two of the three, but they don't do the rest. And so they don't complete the cycle. And therefore the results are less than desirable.
That three-part cycle is so powerful. I think it's important for us to take a moment and dig more deeply into that. Could you give us kind of the essence of it and some of the really need to know components that as we're approaching these conflict situations that we can put these tools to work?
Yes. Yeah. Openness, resourcefulness, and persistence are three universal aspects of the human experience. At the most fundamental cellular level, if you actually look at the cell and the components of a cell and what they do, there is a part of the cell that is open, and its job is to listen and pay attention and get along with other cells. There is a part of the cell that is resourceful, and its job is to get resources and figure out how to get what it needs. And then there is a persistent part of the cell, which is the regulator. It's the one that adheres to standards, regulates, and manages that everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. All three of those are critical. And if any one of those falls down on the job, there is predictable illnesses that follow. If you go up to the next level, for 50 years, social sciences research has been showing that the human experience contains an emotional or affective component, a cognitive or thoughts component, and then a behavioral or experience component. So open, resourceful, and persistent are the same as feelings, thoughts, and actions. All three of those are important components. If you go to the highest level, and I have a whole chapter of this in my book, the rise and fall of human civilizations follows that very same trajectory, except we fall down at some point and we haven't been able to kind of complete the cycle. And I'll leave that for anyone who wants to read the book. But this is a very micro and a very macro set of universals that we've kind of distilled down into interaction principles and core competencies for leaders.
Very, very helpful and very powerful. For me, it's important to know, where am I? When I'm on a trip, it's important to know, hey, if I want to get where I want to go, I need to know where I'm at. Do you have any tools or guidance for us when you talked about this compassion without accountability and the flip side of accountability without compassion and some of these things that I might slip into? What's a good way for me to know where am I when it comes to dealing with conflict and using some of these tools?
Yeah, well, that is so important because unless I know where I am, I don't know where to go and what's next. And our model accounts for both of those. So basically there's 6 places we can be. 3 of them are drama roles. The victim is a position we take where it's like, hey, I'm the problem. A persecutor says, hey, you're the problem. And then the rescuer says, hey, everybody, I'm the solution. And all of those are self-justifying positions where somebody's not okay or somebody's okayness is conditional. That's drama. And it's pretty easy for people to figure out where they are there. When it comes to getting off of the drama triangle and onto the compassion cycle, we talk about, are we being open, creating a safe place for people's motives and feelings to be heard? Are we being resourceful, where we're getting all the resources out on the table and we're non-judgmentally exploring options? Or are we being persistent, where we're getting crystal clear about non-negotiables and principles and that highest calling and the purpose for which we're here? And we can get pretty clear about where we're at on those. The only other decision to make then is, where do we go from here? And if we're on the drama triangle, the job is to get onto the compassion cycle. And if we're on the compassion cycle, there is a particular order and a direction. And it goes open, resourceful, persistent, open, in that order. And so if I'm at resourceful, the next place to go is persistent. If I'm at persistent, the next place is open. So in our model, we try to give a visual for people to quickly say, here's where I am, here's my next move, here's where I go from here.
It's really helpful, that momentum that you have, that we're always moving to keep us out of that drama triangle.
Yeah.
This is really powerful stuff. But on the side of leadership here, I want to shift gears just slightly. Something that you said in the book that really stood out for me was one of the key qualities of a good leader is the ability to solve problems without creating new ones. For me, that's a really interesting statement, and I'd love for you to expand on how that relates to what we're talking about here, or maybe how that really is important in our role as leaders.
Yes. No, I really appreciate you bringing that up, because drama solves a problem and creates a new one. It's always like a little deal with the devil. An example would be a victim could solve the problem of their child screaming at the checkout line by buying the child whatever candy they want. And so the problem of the screaming child is solved. The new problem is we've just reinforced a behavior that we're going to spend a lot more time dealing with, and it's going to cause more problems. Or I'm dealing with my boss asking me to compromise a boundary and stay late on Wednesday night when I had promised my son I would never miss a soccer practice, and I told my boss I was never going to work late. So by saying yes, I solve the problem of the conflict between us, but the new problem I create is I've just etched a new mark in my soul. And so an example would be, say, a rescuer. I go in and I go fix somebody struggling with getting their computer to boot right, and I go do it for them. I've solved the immediate problem of I don't like to see them struggling, but I've created a new problem because now they're dependent on me and have no more new skills than they did before. So that's the kind of that's what a lot of leaders fall into when they're in drama, is they don't realize that the problem they're dealing with is actually creating more. In compassionate accountability, we don't have that problem, because if my commitment is you are worthwhile, we are worthwhile, we're capable, and we're accountable, then every solution is building worthwhileness, it's building capability, and it's building accountability.
Very helpful. And that's just a perfect context, because so often we can focus on making the pain or the discomfort in the moment go away, only to kick the can down into a bigger problem down the road. And that fits in so many parts of our organizations and in our life. So that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. How many times have we said to ourselves, well, I know I should teach them how to do it, but I just don't have time now. Or I know I should whatever, but I could do it better, faster myself. Or I know I should support them in failing and learning from their mistakes, but I just can't deal with the emotional consequences for me and my family. And we make these deals all the time and then pay for it. I remember a mentor of mine when I was a clinical psychologist, he said, if you are working harder than your patients, something is really wrong here. And what I came to realize is that people don't come to us because they want to change. They come to us because they want the pain to go away. And we have to be crystal clear about what's happening in that relationship so that we don't get into drama.
That's perfect. It's a great illustration. So let's bring it back home. Let's get back to the basics, the real essence of what you're focused on with clients and with your message, and review for us, if you would. What is it that I really need to know leaving this conversation that I can apply to my life right away?
The first thing is that openness, resourcefulness, and persistence, they are all interdependent. They all need each other, and they can't stand alone. So if we're going to do healthy conflict, we got to pay attention to all three. However, if there's one thing that most people could do differently tomorrow that will make the biggest impact, it is to start it open. And what I mean by that is disclose to people how you're actually feeling. Let them know what you really want. And as scary and as vulnerable as that feels, there is no other way that people can struggle with you in compassion than if you let them know how you're doing and what you want. It is profound. It's a game changer. And if anybody does one thing, take the risk to try it.
Awesome. Nate, thank you so much for sharing these tools with us today. So powerful. If people want to learn more about compassionate accountability, where should they go?
Thank you. Our website, next-element.com, is the easiest place to get everything. And when you arrive there, there'll be obvious indicators of our stuff and my book. And we have a place where you can get free resources. I have a media page where you can read a ton of articles I've published on this. My speaking page, you can see about what kinds of topics I talk about. And from there, you can go obtain the book from any of your favorite booksellers. But our website is the place to go.
Great, and we'll have a link to that in our show notes. Joining me today has been Nate Regier, CEO and co-founder of the consultancy Next Element, and author of Conflict Without Casualties, a field guide for leading with compassion and accountability. Thank you again, Nate.
You are so welcome. What a privilege to be with your listeners today.
All right, thanks.